Hello, it's Philip Taylor speaking from Richmond Green Chambers in London, and today I'm looking at a book which has come to us from Wildy Simmonds and Hill Publishing, first-class book in their series of practical guides. This one is on wills, and it's a very popular guide. It's now come out in a second edition, been written by two people, Lesley King and Peter Gausden. I'm very pleased with this book because wills is a very difficult area sometimes of law. It's an area that I am involved in, but more as a mediator in many ways. I have advised on a number of occasions. It has a special jurisdiction, but it's an important one, and for a lot of reasons, which I will explain. We'll look at the book first of all. I've given a title of the book review, this, a most important single work for all involved in matters concerning wills, in offering a short practical guide from Wildy. Now, this is what they're doing with a lot of areas of law. I find it extremely helpful, both as an advisor, a mediator, a lawyer, and someone who will just be talking to people saying, look, this is the sort of thing you might need to know about, depending on what the issues are, because it's in simple English, and it's relevant not just to lawyers, but to everybody. There's the front of the book there. The spine you can probably just make out there. And then on the back, it's very difficult, of course, to see very much because it's inverted, but Professor King is given a nice mention, and Peter Gausden is also mentioned with the work that he's done. The book itself is runs to 300 odd pages. It's page numbering at the back. There's a useful index at the back which covers things. It's not a big book, and I think that's very helpful. References are to page numbers in the index. I think it's very useful not to have a very substantial book because they're very, very detailed books on wills, but this book is a practical guide, and that's exactly what you're getting. And what you're getting in addition to that, you've got some appendices at the back, then you've got the body copy of the book itself, tips on avoiding drafting pitfalls, for instance, very practical in essence. If we go to the front of the book, there's the front page there, you can see. There's the little logo for Wildy. Then you've got the first, I'm not sure when the first edition came out. Let's have a look. I don't think it says. Oh no, first edition 2011, and this is 2019. And then you've got the contents section. So 8 years down the route. I'm recording this at the beginning of 2020. You can see the chapter heads at the beginning of the contents section. Then the next page there. Valid execution, revocation, construction, gifts, locating and storing wills, appointment of executors, guardians, legacies, dealing with home and land, very big area, inheritance tax provisions, looking at a lot of other things you can see depending on what you're looking for, funeral and other expenses, tips on avoiding is the very last chapter, and then you've got some short appendices. You've got a family will, intestacy rules, and planning a tax efficient will with case studies, and then you've got the index at the back. And then we go to a preface, which is always worth reading. That's been written by the two authors. The law is as stated on the 31st of May 2019. And I'll mention a little bit about that in a minute. You can see the book structure from the preface. You've got the paragraph numbering there. You do have, I don't know if there isn't really anything by way of footnoting. So most of it's in the body copy itself. But you should find what you're looking for quite quickly. And it gives you basic, when you've got I think the point I would make is when you've got a question in your mind about a will, it will be answered here somewhere, and you should be able to find it quite easily, depending on what the issue is about how the will is structured, who's doing what is permissible and what isn't. Because this area of law brings out a very bad side in human behaviour. I say that because you have to see it to believe it sometimes, with the people squabbling over the wills of a person. It's very sad, incredibly sad, because it leads to massive financial issues and family disputes, people not talking to each other, all sorts of dreadful things, and it really is a problem. Of course, mediation is one of the good ways out of it, if you can at least get people to talk to each other. Quite often, unfortunately, it doesn't work, but it is worth certainly worth trying. Now, what do we say about the book? If you're facing difficulties over a will, this is the book for you, because what Wildy Simmonds and Hill have done is they excel in producing these short practical guides like this one in areas of law which are highly relevant to both unrepresented parties and to practitioners alike. And what we've got here is Professor Lesley King and Peter Gausden having updated their work on wills from the original edition in 2011. Obviously paperback, so it's useful, it's not expensive, it's a cheap-ish book, and I think it's very, very useful in their Practical Guides series. Therefore I'm saying it's an excellent short statement of the law at a time when litigation over disputed wills is, quote, sadly on the rise, as is said by the authors. Costs in such matters can easily swallow up the whole of the modest or moderate estates, as many reported cases in the newspapers illustrate. And I have to say, I mean, having been involved, you see what goes on. They dig in their heels on both sides, you get press publicity, and then the money's gone because it's because of the failure to enter some sort of discussion and try to perhaps just step back a little bit and think about what's happening. And of course it's very difficult because you've lost your loved one, you've got all these problems, and it really is a difficulty. As I say, it swallows up the money if you're not careful. So as I say, never go to law if you can avoid it, because the basis is to try and deal with these disputes, resolve these disputes without having to go to a trial and all the problems, including sometimes really appalling publicity. Additional problem, of course, well known to practitioners and commented by the authors, is that just as bad as the financial wastes are the irreconcilable rifts and misery that bitter family disputes can cause, and the problem, of course, we're all too familiar with. And for these reasons, the book, I think, is an absolute must for those tempted to litigate, where such a course of action should be avoided if at all possible. As I've said before, never go to law if you can avoid it, because King and Gausden set out what is involved in making a will, with particular reference to avoiding those issues which often give rise to litigation. And I hope some people will think that this is a book that should be read, because it will give you some very sensible advice and will avoid some of the difficulties later on. The purpose behind the work, then, is to inform people who know little about making wills, but need to know more, in the hope that readers will avoid costly mistakes, as the authors say. And they do just that, of course. That is, not the readers will avoid the costly mistakes by reading the book. The authors, of course, provide information on the formation, the formalities for making a will, the rules on testamentary capacity and related issues. That, of course, deals with obviously the problems with dementia and so forth, and all of those difficulties, which are can be very substantial. And we're also looking at things which are less common aspects of will making, which can cause problems for practitioners, such as gifts, the benefits of pets, or for pets, which is the cat home, giving all the money to the cat home, the dog home. These are really big problems sometimes, which can cause, as I've indicated, really big problems within families. Gifts to employees, gifts of business interests, mutual as opposed to mirror wills, testamentary options, burial and other requests, and dealing with properties overseas. That's just to name but a few. And I've been involved in some of the overseas properties difficulties where you have other jurisdictions involved. Now, this book doesn't go into that sort of depth, but in this day and age, you are quite often going to have, you could have testators with extended families. And there can be the problems because they're going to be property in, say, there could be property in Germany, the Channel Islands, wherever it could be. So you are actually having different issues from the ones that we might have associated with this subject matter in the past. And of course, such matters are covered by reference to the new rules on the interpretation of wills coming from the Supreme Court's decision in the case of Marley and Rawlins. And it's a practical, concise guide that we're getting here from Wildy that reviews also things like the inheritance tax implications of will planning and drafting, which are all covered with typical strategies for dealing with family wealth by making the best use of exemptions and reliefs available. Let's get one thing straight. This is not tax evasion or tax avoidance. It's tax planning. It's important because you've got to think ahead and say, these are what the rules are, this is what I can do, and this is sensible, this is how we're going to do things. And it's not trying to diddle the state or anything else. It's just being prudent. And I wish that the media sometimes would recognise that that's what is in the inherent obligation on ordinary people, because at the end of the day they want the best for their family, and that's the basis of it. And then the fighting that then takes place afterwards ruins everything. What we do have, which I liked in the book, is there's a chapter aimed at dealing with the drafting pitfalls and, more importantly, how to avoid them, and that's at the back, and that's a very helpful addition. Let me conclude by saying that, of course, problems can arise if the existence of a will is uncertain. So there's a helpful section on storing and locating a will, because that can be a problem as well, finding it. That's the classic sort of problem you get in a film. Oh, I suddenly found this will, and it's a different will from what everybody thought. And it makes a good story in fiction, but you do get some really interesting factual problems as well. And of course the book also gives us a section of useful precedents and a checklist at the back, which I found very helpful indeed. Now, the publication date of the paperback second edition is cited at the 30th of September 2019, and the law, as I indicated earlier, is stated as 31st of May 2019, and I'm recording this at the beginning of 2020. One last look at the book. It's a light book, it's not a big heavy book at all. There it is, paperback. Side again, spine. I can't really make much of that out. If I open it in the middle, let's have a look and see what we're going to... Dealing with home and land. You can see the structure. Permission to occupy, that's an important area. What happens when you've got people who are living in the property. Family house as part of residue or separate gift. Option to buy. The paragraph numbering. The issues. What I did like about this is when you look at the subheadings, they go straight to the issues and the questions that the client will ask me, or that you as a person with a problem will probably have. Oh, that's a question I want to ask her. You should find what you're looking for in this book. And with that, I'd like to thank Andrew Riddoch and all the people at Wildy who are involved in producing these guides, very much indeed. They make our lives a lot easier. I think it makes a lot of sense for a lot of people to know that these books are available, because they help. At the end of the day, it's trying to make lives easier for everybody in what is becoming a more and more complex society. So a big thank you to the authors and everybody involved in the publication. Bye-bye.